Hello and welcome to your exam technique webinar. My name is Jack Fielding. I am the Senior CIPS Programme Leader and Assessor at Chamber Business Training. During this webinar, we'll take a look at the different exam formats, objective and constructive response. We'll have a look at some questions across both types of exams, and we'll also have a look at some exam techniques and revision techniques. To start, some brief information about the exam formats and the number of exams on the different levels. The first exam type is known as objective response. This is a multiple choice exam, and on level 3 there are 5 of them, level 4 there are 6 of them, at level 5 there is also 6 of them, and at level 6 there are 3 of them. They are usually single short questions, however there are sometimes some drag and drop style questions which are introduced at level 5. The exams are an hour and a half long, and the amount of questions varies per level. For level 3 exams there are 70 questions, for level 4 there are around 60, at level 5 there are 46 questions and 2 8-mark drag and drop, and at level 6 there are 35 questions with 2 10-mark scenario based questions. The exams when completed are automatically marked by a computer, and you need 70% to pass the exams. It usually takes around 4 weeks to receive your results. Here we can see an example from a level 4 module, which is level 4 module 2, defining business needs. Here the question is testing the student's knowledge of a common model found across different modules and different levels within CIPS. This is the Kraujik matrix. You can see here the introduction of the select to that apply style questions, and these are introduced at level 4. The other exam type is known as constructive response. This is an essay-based exam, and on level 3 there aren't any. At level 4 there are 2 of them, at level 5 there are 2 of them, and at level 6 there are 4 of them. The way they are structured is designed to test your knowledge, your understanding, and also your application ability. They're a 3-hour exam with typically 4 questions, and the questions are 25 marks each. Some of the questions in the exam will relate to a case study where you are presented with a short scenario. However, some will be general questions too that don't relate to a case study. And these exams, when completed, are marked by a CIPS qualified assessor, and you need 50% to pass the exam. The results are also graded, so 50 to 59% is a pass, 60% to 74% is a merit, and 75% and above is a distinction, and it usually takes around 8 weeks to receive your results. We can see some examples here of typical questions from level 4, 5 and 6 constructive response exams. You may notice that the command word differs across the different levels, from level 4 to level 5 and level 5 to level 6, because CIPS are looking for different levels of responses from students. You can find a list of all the command words via the CIPS website. So on to the exam techniques, starting with objective response. There are 5 key tips that I give students when it comes to tackling the objective response exams, starting with going with your gut feeling. Sometimes students spend 2 or 3 minutes going back and forth between 2 different options. If you don't know the answer within the first sort of 20 or 30 seconds, then move on. Within the exam, you have the ability to flag the question and move on to the next. If you don't know the answer straight away, flag it, and at the end of the exam, you have the opportunity to go back through the questions you've flagged along the way. So my second tip is to flag the question and move on. If you don't know it right away, you will have the ability to come back to it later on. When you reach the end of the exam, it will tell you how many you have flagged and you can go back to them. So don't worry and panic, you should have the time to go back. Number 3 is process of elimination. Rather than trying to identify the correct answers right away, identify the answers that you know definitely aren't right. This will then leave you with a couple of options and you have a better chance of getting it right that way. Number 4 is being aware of the types of questions. So you don't want any surprises in the exam. So you should have a good idea of the content that's going to be covered, but also the structure of the questions. So for example, some students aren't aware when moving up to level 5 that there are drag and drop style questions. When we get to level 6, there's the introduction of the select all that apply. It's that apprehension and the unknown that panics us. So you need to be aware of the types of questions that may appear in the exam, the structure of the questions. You must also save enough time to review your answers. So with the multiple choice exams, you have an hour and 30 minutes. This is usually enough time to answer the questions, but be conscious of flagging some of the questions as you're going along. Students sometimes forget about the flagged questions and the amount of flagged questions, so always keep an eye on the time and make sure you have enough time at the end to go back and review any of the questions that you've flagged. Now moving on to exam techniques for constructive response. A constructive response exam is 3 hours long, which sounds like a lot of time, but it passes very quickly. So it's important with these exams to manage your time effectively. Now most questions are 25 marks, therefore over the course of a 3-hour exam, you should allocate 40-45 minutes per answer. You need to allow yourself a few minutes at the beginning to read each question carefully before you start it. So it's good practice to give yourself a few minutes at first to thoroughly read the question. Sometimes students start off with a question that they like and spend far too much time on it, and then they're playing catch up for the rest of the exam. So keep an eye on the clock and stick to your allocated time. When you've logged on in the exam and you're ready to start, the questions will appear on the screen in front of you. You don't have to answer the questions in any particular order. I advise students to answer the questions in whatever order they see best, starting with the strongest answers. So spend a few minutes reading the questions at the beginning, try to read between the lines to understand what the question is actually asking, and then tackle them in whatever order you see best. CIPS use a variety of command words in the exams and they all have different meanings and they're all looking for different types of responses from students. So understanding the command word is important because the student can then answer the question fully, hitting the criteria that the examiner is looking for. So it's important to know what each of the command words mean, and you can find a full list of the command words via the CIPS website. Now, when it comes to word count, CIPS recommend a minimum of 800 words for a 25-mark answer. But not all questions are going to be worth 25 marks, but it can be used as a guide for some of the lower mark questions. Now, some of the questions at level 4 are broken down by a part A and a part B. So this might be 10 mark and then 15 marks. And it's important that you have an idea of the level of content to type. For those questions that are 10 marks, you should be aiming for around 2 to 250 words. The new computer-based exams allow use of a notes facility to type some side notes which can be accessed throughout the exam. It's good practice to use the facility to be able to create your structure to an answer, or perhaps create a bulleted list of what you want to discuss in your answer. You're not marked on any of your plans or your notes, and it can be kept separate, but it's useful to use it to be able to review your answers at the end and make sure you've covered all the points that you wanted to. Getting the structure right is absolutely critical. A clear, concise paper is what an assessor wants to see. The use of headings and subheadings is something that I actively promote to achieve that. If a student is asked to identify or describe 5 things, it's a good idea to number each paragraph. That makes it clear for the examiner to see you've addressed the requirements of the question, and it makes it easier for the examiner to mark. A 25-mark answer should always have a good structure. It should have a definition, an introduction, the main body, and the conclusion. Now, don't always worry about remembering the CIPS definition of something. You can use your own words. Throughout the different modules, there are hundreds of different models and theorists. And whilst we're not expected to know every one of them, the use of some examples in your answers is important. I often advise students to try and link models to specific topics. For example, market analysis with Porter's 5 forces or steeple, Ray Carter's 10 C's if asked a question about supply evaluation, perhaps the Pareto analysis or the Kraujik matrix when asked about mapping or categorizing spend. Whilst it's good to know these models and reference them in an exam, they've got to be referenced in the right way at the right time. The examiner isn't looking for a theory dump with a list of all the models that you know, more that you understand the model to the extent that you recognise how it can or how it should be used and applied. Whilst we've just identified that it's important to reference models where possible, it's also important to reference practical examples if possible. Some students favour the essay-based exams over multiple choice because it allows them to discuss, describe, or make recommendations about a particular topic or subject. Now, if you can't provide an example from your own experience, your own organisation, then use the media. Use media articles. Reference some wider research. If you can reference that in your exam, it shows the examiner that you've done your revision. So quoting research and using examples gives you the individualism that separates your answers from everybody else, and it makes for an interesting read for the examiner. Through the effective use of time and structure, there should be an opportunity to review your answers once completed. And it's recommended that a review of answers be carried out to make sure you've covered all your points. It provides an opportunity to add in any missing pieces of information. You're not penalised for any spelling mistakes or any other grammatical errors, so don't worry about saving time to go over those. Make sure you have enough time at the end of the exam to look at your notes facility and ensure that you've included all the points that you wanted to discuss. They're just some of my exam technique tips, and I hope you found them useful. Now, when it comes to revising for the exam, there are some techniques that you can use to make your revision effective revision. So something that I think is incredibly important is mixing up your revision. So using a mix of resources, such as your textbooks, webinars, quiz materials, practice questions. Your revision shouldn't be one-dimensional, otherwise it will become very boring very quickly. So you need to have a variety. And on Moodle, there are a number of resources that you can use to ensure that you mix up your revision. So use your textbooks, listen to the webinars, try some practice questions. Also use friends and family with your quiz materials, again just to mix it up. Try some of the practice questions. There are a host of assignments on our Moodle platform by module for you to have a go at. If you're a more visual learner, perhaps produce some flashcards and mind maps. I find that rewriting material helps it sink in. Displaying it somewhere, you're able to see it on a frequent basis, and again, that helps it sink in. Also use technology and social media for some of your wider research. YouTube produces lots of different videos on some of the common models, so it's good to sit and listen to those sometimes rather than reading the textbooks. And also seek some feedback from your peers and from your tutor as well. Thank you for listening to the webinar, and good luck with your exams.